"Quick, he's waking up," said the little thief. But the millionaire woke up and did something terrible. Tell me what you thought of this story with a rating from 0 to 10 and comment what city you're watching from. I'd love to know if you liked my story and get to know you better, so subscribe to my channel to support my work. I'm counting on your help. The clock struck 2:15 in the morning when Catherine held her twin sister's hand tightly. The two 4-year-old girls walked through the empty streets of the affluent neighborhood of Westwood, their bare feet making almost imperceptible noises on the cold asphalt. Their disheveled blonde hair shone faintly under the glow of the streetlights, and their dirty clothes clung to their thin bodies from the early morning dampness. "Valerie, I'm so hungry," whispered Catherine, her tiny voice cutting through the silence of the night. "Me too," replied Valerie, squeezing her sister's hand. "But remember what we agreed? You distract, I look." The two had developed this survival system during the weeks they had lived on the streets, ever since the distant relatives who cared for them simply disappeared one morning, leaving only an empty house and two lost children in the world. Catherine had a gift for attracting attention with her innocent questions, while Valerie had a knack for finding small objects or scraps of food they could trade for a meal at the downtown bakeries. That night, hunger was stronger than fear. They hadn't managed to get anything to eat for 2 days, and weakness was beginning to make their steps even slower and more uncertain. That's when they spotted the exposed brick mansion at the end of the street, with its manicured gardens and imposing dark wood door. "Catherine, look. There!" Valerie pointed to a faint light coming from the back of the house. "Someone's awake." Arthur Harrison was sitting in his brown leather armchair, his head lolling to the side in a fitful sleep. The 52-year-old businessman had been suffering from insomnia for months, ever since the financial problems of his small regional bakery chain began to pile up with the debts of a turbulent divorce. His ex-wife, Isabella, had left, taking half of his assets and all the certainty he had about himself as a man and a future father. The safe remained open next to the armchair, filled with the weekly earnings that he obsessively counted every night, as if the numbers could bring back the control he had lost over his life. Bills of different denominations were scattered on the coffee table, along with coins that shimmered under the light of the old lamp. The girls approached the back door, which had been left ajar due to the suffocating heat of that December dawn. Valerie signaled for Catherine to wait while she peeked inside the house. The man seemed to be sleeping soundly, and the money was right there, so close. "Don't take too much," Valerie whispered in her sister's ear. "Just a few coins to buy bread." The two entered silently, their hearts beating so fast they feared they would wake the sleeping man. Catherine stood guard while Valerie approached the safe, her large eyes fixed on the golden coins that represented salvation from the hunger gnawing at their empty stomachs. It was when Valerie's small fingers touched the first coin that Arthur stirred in his armchair, muttering something incomprehensible. Catherine froze, seeing that he was beginning to wake up. "Quick, he's waking up," she whispered to her sister in a desperate voice. Arthur opened his eyes slowly, still confused from the interrupted sleep. For a moment he thought he was dreaming when he saw two small figures near the safe. But when his vision fully adjusted, reality hit him like a bucket of cold water. Two identical girls, no more than 4 years old, were in his living room. One of them held a few coins in her trembling hands, while the other watched her with wide, terrified eyes. Their clothes were dirty and torn, their hair was matted, and a concerning thinness marked their angelic faces. Arthur's first instinct was to scream, to call the police, to protect his property. But something in the fragility of those children completely paralyzed him. They didn't look like experienced bandits or miniature criminals. They just looked like two lost and desperate children. "Don't hurt us," whispered Catherine, tears starting to stream down her dirty cheeks. "We just wanted to buy some bread." Valerie dropped the coins on the floor, the metallic clatter echoing through the silent room. "Sorry, mister. We were very hungry." Arthur slowly got up from the armchair, trying not to frighten the girls any further. His eyes scanned their small, thin bodies, the accumulated dirt, the genuine fear shining in their gazes. Something in his chest tightened in a way he hadn't experienced in years. "Are you hungry?" he asked in a soft voice, crouching down to their level. The two nodded shyly, still ready to run if necessary. "How long has it been since you've eaten?" "2 days," replied Valerie, the braver of the two. "But we were going to put the coins back later, I swear." Arthur looked at the coins scattered on the floor, then at the safe full of money, and finally at these two children who represented a need so pure and desperate that it made all his financial problems seem insignificant. "Where are your parents?" he asked, even though he sensed the answer wouldn't be good. "We don't know," said Catherine. "Our aunt and uncle left and never came back." At that moment, looking at these two abandoned girls who would rather steal coins than ask for help, Arthur made a decision that would change his life forever. Instead of calling them thieves or threatening them with the police, he extended a hand to them. "How about I make you a snack?" Arthur's mansion kitchen was large and modern, with white marble countertops that reflected the soft light of the central chandelier. The twins remained glued to each other, watching every move of the man who had shown kindness when all past experiences had taught them to mistrust adults. Arthur opened the refrigerator and found some sliced bread, ham, cheese, and a little bit of milk. His hands trembled slightly as he prepared 2 sandwiches, still processing the surreal nature of the situation. He had woken up a lonely and desperate man, and now he was feeding 2 abandoned children in his kitchen. "What are your names?" he asked as he cut the sandwiches in half. "I'm Catherine," said the more talkative girl, "and she's Valerie. We're twins." "I can see that." Arthur smiled for the first time in weeks. "I'm Arthur. This is my house." Valerie whispered something in Catherine's ear, who nodded before speaking. "Are you going to call the police after we eat?" The question hit Arthur like a punch to the gut. These children lived in a world where even kindness came with a price, where every act of goodness could be a trap. "I'm not calling anyone," he replied firmly. "I just want you to eat and be okay." The girls devoured the sandwiches in silence, like little wild animals who didn't know when their next meal would be. Arthur watched every bite, noticing how they saved the last crumbs in their pockets, a habit developed by those who know hunger intimately. "Where do you sleep?" he asked when they finished. Catherine and Valerie looked at each other, clearly debating internally whether they should trust this strange man who had given them food without asking for anything in return. "In the vacant lot near the old bakery," Valerie finally admitted. "The one with the broken windows." Arthur's blood ran cold. He knew that place well. It was the first bakery he had inherited from his father, closed for months for renovations that never started due to financial problems. The lot next to it was known to be frequented by drug users and homeless people. "That place is dangerous for children," he said, trying to keep his voice calm. "We hide well," Catherine defended, "and there's a big cardboard box where we both fit." The image of the 2 girls huddled in a cardboard box, trying to protect themselves from the dangers of the night, broke Arthur's heart. He remembered Isabella's cruel words during the divorce. "You would never be a good father, Arthur. You have no paternal instinct whatsoever." "Listen," he said, crouching down to their level again. "It's too late for you to go back there now. How about you sleep here tonight? I have a guest room." Terror returned to the girl's eyes. Valerie pulled Catherine back, both preparing to flee. "We won't do anything bad," Catherine said quickly. "We promise." "That's not it," Arthur sighed. "I'm not worried about you hurting me. I'm worried about you getting hurt out there." It took 2 hours of patient conversation to convince the twins that staying would be safe. Arthur showed them the guest room with its double bed and private bathroom. He offered clean clothes, his own t-shirts that were huge on their small bodies, and watched as they took a bath, hearing their laughter for the first time. When they finally lay down, still clinging to each other in the center of the large bed, Arthur stood at the door watching. Valerie was softly humming a lullaby she must have learned from her mother, while Catherine drew imaginary birds in the air with her fingers. "Arthur?" Catherine called out in the darkness. "Yes?" "Thank you for the sandwich." Arthur closed the door gently and walked to his own bed, but sleep wouldn't come. For the first time in months, his insomnia wasn't caused by financial worries or the loneliness that had consumed him since the divorce. It was caused by 2 children who had entered his life in the most unexpected way possible. The next morning, he woke to the smell of burnt coffee coming from the kitchen. He rushed downstairs and found Catherine standing on a chair, trying to reach the coffee maker, while Valerie held her waist to keep her from falling. "What are you doing?" he asked, more surprised than angry. "We wanted to make coffee for you," Catherine explained, carefully getting off the chair. "As a thank you." "But we don't know how to use this machine," Valerie admitted, pointing to the modern electric coffee maker. Arthur laughed, a sound that hadn't left his throat in so long he almost didn't recognize it as his own. He taught the girls how to brew coffee, drank the bitter cup they insisted on serving, and found himself thinking how different the house felt, with children's voices echoing through the rooms. It was during breakfast that reality hit again. He had 2 abandoned children in his house, with no documents, no known family, and no legal rights over them. And worse, he had no idea what to do next. "Would you like to stay here a little longer?" he asked hesitantly. The twins looked at each other with that silent communication only twins possess. "Until when?" asked Valerie, always the more practical one. "I don't know," Arthur admitted, "until we figure out what's best for you." It was Catherine who stood up first, walking around the table to hug Arthur's legs. Valerie followed a second later, and there, with 2 unknown children hugging his legs, Arthur felt something he hadn't experienced since his adolescence, the feeling of being needed. That afternoon, when he went out to buy suitable clothes for the girls at the local department store, Arthur didn't realize he was being watched. His neighbor, Mrs. Peterson, a 65-year-old woman known for her sharp tongue, had noticed the 2 blonde children playing in the backyard of the Harrison mansion. "How strange," she muttered to herself, adjusting her glasses. Arthur never mentioned having nieces. She picked up the phone and dialed her friend Joyce, who worked at the county clerk's office downtown. "Joyce, did you know Arthur Harrison has 2 little girls living with him?" "What do you mean, Peterson?" 2 identical children, very blonde. They must be about 4 years old. They're playing in his yard right now." "That is strange. After the divorce, he's lived alone in that mansion. I've never heard of any child relatives." Mrs. Peterson watched the girls run through the yard, barefoot and free, their laughter carrying through the air. There was something about the 2 she couldn't identify, something that bothered her for no apparent reason. "I'm going to keep an eye on this," she told Joyce before hanging up. Meanwhile, Arthur returned from shopping with bags full of children's clothes, toys, and school supplies. His bank account had taken a considerable hit, but seeing the twins' eyes light up as they received the first gifts of their lives was worth every penny spent. "Are these really for us?" asked Valerie, holding a brown teddy bear. "Really for you," Arthur confirmed. That night, as the girls slept clutching their new teddy bears, Arthur lay awake, planning. He needed to find a way to legalize the situation to ensure they would be safe. But a voice in his head, sounding suspiciously like Isabella's, whispered that he knew nothing about raising children, that he was making a mistake. Across town, in a poorly lit public office, social worker Helen Foster was finishing her night shift when she received an anonymous call. "I'd like to report a suspicious situation involving minors." Helen sighed. After 15 years working in child protection, she had developed a sixth sense for distinguishing legitimate reports from neighborhood gossip. But protocol was protocol. "Can you give me the details?" Helen Foster arrived at Arthur Harrison's mansion the next morning with her worn leather briefcase and an expression she had perfected over 15 years of handling delicate situations involving minors. At 42, she had seen it all, from genuine cases of love and protection to the most elaborate facades hiding terrible abuse. Arthur answered the door, still in his bathrobe, his disheveled hair revealing he had slept little. The twins were in the living room, playing with new dolls on the Persian rug that decorated the space. Valerie wore a light blue dress, while Catherine had chosen pink, but both had their hair still damp from their morning bath. "Mr. Harrison, I'm Helen Foster from Social Services. We received a report about 2 minors residing in your home without proper documentation." Arthur's blood ran cold. He glanced over Helen's shoulder and saw the curtain of the neighboring house move slightly. Mrs. Peterson was watching everything through the window. "Please come in," he said, trying to maintain his composure. "I can explain everything." Helen entered, and her attention immediately turned to the 2 girls. They had stopped playing and were watching her with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. During her years of experience, Helen had developed the ability to read signs of fear or trauma in children, but what she saw in those 2 surprised her. They were clearly well cared for. Their clothes were new and appropriate, their hair clean and combed, and there were no visible signs of neglect or abuse. More importantly, they didn't show the typical fear of children in problematic situations. On the contrary, they seemed comfortable and safe. "These are Catherine and Valerie," Arthur said, crouching beside the girls. "Girls, this is Miss Helen. She works to help children." "Hi, Aunt Helen," Catherine said with her innocent smile. Helen sat in the armchair Arthur offered and opened her briefcase. "Mr. Harrison, I need to understand the legal situation of these children. Are they your relatives?" Arthur took a deep breath. He knew this moment would come, but he didn't feel prepared. "Not exactly. They were at risk when I found them. I offered them temporary shelter." "At risk how?" "Living on the streets, alone, without adult supervision." Helen made notes on her clipboard, observing the girls' reactions as Arthur spoke. They continued to play, but she could tell they were listening to every word. "And where are their legal guardians?" "We don't know," Arthur admitted. "They were abandoned by distant relatives." Valerie dropped her doll and approached Arthur, climbing into his lap with the naturalness of a child who feels safe. The gesture did not go unnoticed by Helen. "Mr. Harrison, you understand that this situation cannot continue this way. Without legal documentation, without a formal adoption process, these children need to be placed in a shelter while we search for their families or suitable adoptive families." Helen's words fell upon the room like a sentence. Catherine stopped playing completely, her eyes filling with tears she tried to hide. Valerie clung tighter to Arthur's neck. "Please," Arthur said, his voice failing. "They've suffered so much. Here they are safe, well cared for, happy. I understand your good intentions, but there are protocols. These children need legal stability, a regularized situation." It was then that Catherine stood up and walked over to Helen, her little red eyes fixed on the social worker's face. "Are you going to take us away?" The simple, direct question made Helen hesitate. There was something in the way the girl looked at her, a premature maturity born of suffering that touched her deeply. "Honey, it's not about taking you away. It's about finding the best place for you to be." "But this is already the best place," said Valerie, getting off Arthur's lap to stand by her sister. "Arthur makes us sandwiches, and he doesn't yell, and he bought us teddy bears." Helen looked around the elegant room, then at Arthur, who was clearly struggling not to show the desperation he felt. There was something genuine there, something her experience told her to investigate further before making rash decisions. "Mr. Harrison, I'll need to conduct a full assessment of the situation. This means I'll have to come back other times, conduct separate interviews with the girls, and verify their living conditions." "How much time do we have?" Arthur asked. "That depends on what I find during the assessment. But for now, they can stay here as long as you understand that this is temporary and that you will need to start the proper legal procedures if you want to formalize the situation." After Helen left, Arthur sat on the sofa with the two girls, one on each side. The heavy silence was broken only by the ticking of the old clock on the wall. "Arthur, are you going to let her take us?" asked Catherine, her tiny voice laden with fear. "I'll do everything I can to stop that from happening," he promised, kissing the top of each of their heads. "But I need help with that." That afternoon, Arthur called his personal lawyer, Dr. Frank Roberts, and explained the situation. The older man listened in silence before sighing deeply. "Arthur, this is very complicated. Adoption processes can take years, and without knowing the biological family, Frank, they have no one else. I saw with my own eyes the state they were in. I understand your motivation, but you need to be aware of the challenges. Your current financial situation, being a single man with no prior experience with children." Arthur hung up the phone more frustrated than before. Every person he consulted seemed to find new obstacles, new reasons why he wouldn't be suitable to care for the twins. Meanwhile, downtown, Helen was in her office reviewing her notes when she received a second call about the same case. "Helen, it's Joyce from the clerk's office. Remember we talked about some kids at Arthur Harrison's house? I was there today. What did you find out?" "Well, I did a search of the old records. There's something interesting here about the Harrison family." Helen adjusted her glasses and grabbed a notepad. "What exactly?" "Arthur's father, Michael Harrison, had a bakery downtown decades ago. I found employee records, and there's a name here that caught my attention: Oscar Mason." "Why?" "Because this same Oscar Mason appears in some birth records I cross-referenced. He had a son, who in turn had twin daughters, girls who were registered with the names Catherine and Valerie Mason." The silence on the other end of the line was long. Helen felt the pieces of a puzzle starting to form in her mind. "Joyce, these girls, where are their parents now?" "According to the records I found, both died in a traffic accident about 8 months ago. The children were left in the care of distant relatives, but there are no more recent records about them." Helen hung up the phone with a strange feeling in her stomach. If her suspicions were correct, the connection between Arthur Harrison and those two girls was much deeper than anyone imagined. That night, Arthur was lying in his bed, staring at the ceiling and listening to the soft sounds coming from the next room. The twins had insisted on sleeping with their door open, to make sure you don't leave during the night, as Valerie had explained. His thoughts were interrupted by small footsteps in the hallway. Catherine appeared at the door, holding her teddy bear. "Arthur, can I sleep here? I'm scared of the shelter men." Before he could answer, Valerie appeared too, carrying her own teddy bear. "Can I too?" Arthur opened his arms, and the two girls ran to the bed, settling on either side of him. There, in the dark, listening to the quiet breathing of the two children who had completely changed his life, Arthur made a decision. No matter what it cost, no matter the legal or financial obstacles, he would fight with all his strength to keep those two girls safe and happy. They had entered his life by chance, but now he couldn't imagine a future without them. What he didn't know was that the next day, a discovery would change everything again. Friday morning brought a call that would change everything. Arthur was preparing breakfast while the twins watched cartoons on the living room TV when the phone rang. On the other end of the line, a female voice he didn't immediately recognize. "Arthur, it's me, Isabella." The name of his ex-wife made Arthur nearly drop the cup he was holding. It had been 8 months since their last conversation, a bitter argument over the division of assets during the divorce. "Isabella, how did you get my number?" "I never changed your contacts, Arthur. I need to talk to you." Catherine appeared in the kitchen, pulling at her oversized nightgown. "Who's on the phone?" she asked softly. Arthur gestured for her to wait and moved to the corner of the kitchen. "What do you want, Isabella?" "I heard you're taking care of 2 children. Little girls." Arthur's blood ran cold. How could she know? Who told you that? "Does it matter? Arthur, I need to see you. There are things you don't know about us, about what happened between us." "There is no us anymore, Isabella. You made that very clear when you left. Please, give me a chance to explain. I'm arriving in Westwood this afternoon." Before Arthur could protest, the call ended. He stood there holding the dead phone, trying to process what had just happened. "Arthur, are you okay?" Valerie had joined her sister in the kitchen, both looking at him with concern. "I'm fine," he lied, crouching down to their level. "How about we have breakfast in the garden today? It's a beautiful day." As the girls ran off excitedly to get dressed, Arthur leaned against the kitchen counter, feeling the weight of a new complication. Isabella showing up right now when his life was finally starting to make sense again couldn't be a coincidence. At 2 in the afternoon, a silver BMW pulled up to the mansion's gate. Arthur watched from the window as Isabella got out of the car, her brown hair tied in an elegant bun, wearing a navy blue dress he recognized as expensive. She looked nervous, adjusting the bag on her shoulder several times before ringing the bell. "Girls, go play in your room for a while, okay?" Arthur asked. "I have a visitor." Catherine studied him with the sharp perception children have for detecting tension in adults. "Is it someone bad?" "Not someone bad, just complicated." Arthur opened the door and came face to face with the woman who had shared 5 years of his life. Isabella looked different, more fragile perhaps, or more tired. Her eyes, once always confident, now carried a vulnerability he wasn't used to seeing. "Hi, Arthur." "Isabella, come in." She walked past him, her eyes scanning the room that had once been partially hers. She stopped when she saw toys scattered on the rug, dolls, coloring books, crayons. "So it's true. You're taking care of children." "Yes. And before you ask any questions, they are not my biological daughters. They are girls I found abandoned." Isabella turned to face him, and Arthur saw tears forming in her eyes. "Arthur, I'm pregnant." The words hit Arthur like a lightning bolt. He sat down heavily on the sofa, trying to process the information. "With whom?" he asked, his voice sounding hoarser than he intended. "With Richard. You remember him from the office?" Arthur remembered Richard Fields, corporate lawyer, the man for whom Isabella had developed a special friendship in the last months of their marriage. "Congratulations," he said, unable to hide his bitterness. "Arthur, it's not what you're thinking. Richard and it didn't work out. He doesn't want the child. He said he's not ready to be a father." Isabella sat in the armchair opposite him, her hands trembling slightly. "When I heard you were taking care of 2 girls, I thought maybe." "Maybe what?" "Maybe you could forgive me. Maybe we could try again. Be a real family now." The silence that followed was heavy and laden with history. Arthur looked at the woman he had loved for 5 years, the woman who had left him in pieces, and felt nothing. Not anger, not love, not longing. Just a distant sadness for all that could have been and never was. Isabella, you left because you said I would never be a good father. Remember, I was wrong, seeing you with these girls. You haven't seen me with them, Arthur interrupted. You heard neighborhood gossip. It was at that moment that Catherine appeared in the room, closely followed by Valerie. They had come down to get some water, but stopped when they saw the strange woman sitting in the armchair. Arthur, who is she? Catherine asked with her typical frankness. Isabella looked at the two identical girls, their blonde hair shining in the afternoon light, their curious little eyes fixed on her. Something in her expression changed, a mixture of surprise and something that looked almost like envy. They are beautiful, she whispered. Girls, this is Isabella. Isabella, these are Catherine and Valerie. Valerie, always more reserved, stayed near the stairs, but Catherine, with her natural curiosity, approached. Are you Arthur's girlfriend? She asked. The innocent question made Isabella blush. No, sweetie, I'm an old friend. Oh, do you want to play with us? We have new dolls. Before Isabella could answer, Arthur intervened. Girls, Isabella can't stay long. How about you go back to your room? I promise a special snack later. After the girls went upstairs, Isabella remained silent for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was different. They love you. You can see it. And I love them, Arthur replied without hesitation. During our marriage, I always thought you had no paternal instinct, that you would be cold, distant with children. She paused, wiping away a tear that was running down her cheek. But seeing how they are with you, how safe they feel. Isabella, what do you really want? She took a deep breath before answering. I want you to forgive me. I want us to consider trying. Again, with my baby and your girls, we could be a family. Arthur stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the garden where the twins had played that morning. Their new bicycles were leaning against the tree next to the small slide he had installed last week. Isabella, you destroyed our marriage. You left when I needed you most, and now you come back because another man rejected you. That's not it. It's exactly that. He turned to face her. And you know what? I don't even care anymore. These two girls have taught me more about unconditional love in 2 weeks than I learned in 5 years of marriage. Isabella stood up, her composure finally crumbling. Arthur, please, I'm alone. I have no one. You had someone. You had me, and you chose to throw it all away. The sound of small footsteps on the stairs announced the twins' return. They came down carrying drawings they had made, colorful birds flying over a house with 3 figures in front, a tall man and 2 small girls. Arthur, we made drawings of our family, said Catherine, handing him the paper. Our family, repeated Valerie, hugging Arthur's leg. Isabella looked at the scene, Arthur holding the drawing as the 2 girls clung to him with evident adoration, and understood that she had arrived too late. There was no room for her in this new world Arthur had built. I'll go, she said softly, picking up her bag. It was a mistake to come here. Arthur didn't try to stop her. He walked her to the door, the twins remaining in the living room. Isabella, he called out when she was already in the garden. I hope you find the happiness you're looking for, but it won't be here. She nodded without turning around and walked to her car. Arthur closed the door and returned to the living room, where Catherine and Valerie were waiting for him with worried expressions. Was she your wife? Asked Valerie with an intuition impressive for a 4-year-old. She was, Arthur admitted, but not anymore. Good, said Catherine, hugging his waist, because now you're our daddy. The word daddy echoed through the room, and Arthur felt his heart contract in a way he had never experienced before. At that moment, looking at the 2 girls who had chosen him as their family, he knew he would fight. against any person or institution that tried to separate them. But what he didn't know was that same afternoon, Helen Foster had made a discovery that would complicate everything even more. The following Monday, Helen Foster arrived at her office early, carrying a folder full of documents she had managed to gather over the weekend. Her research into the Mason family had revealed disturbing information that completely changed her perception of the twins' case. Oscar Mason had been more than just an employee at the old Harrison bakery. For 23 years, he had been Michael Harrison's right-hand man, practically a member of the family. The record showed that Michael had even lent Oscar money to buy his own house, an unusual gesture for an employer at that time. But the most shocking piece of information was in a death certificate Helen had found in the old clerk's office archives. Oscar Mason had died in a workplace accident inside the Harrisons' own bakery. He had fallen from a ladder while fixing a problem on the ceiling, hitting his head on a hard surface. Michael Harrison was present when it happened. Helen picked up the phone and dialed Joyce at the clerk's office. "Joyce, I need you to get me a copy of Michael Harrison's will. I have a very important suspicion." "I was already thinking about it. I'll look for it today." Meanwhile at the mansion, Arthur woke up to the unusual sound of absolute silence. Normally the twins woke up early, filling the house with their excited voices and quick footsteps down the hallways. Worried, he went up to their room and found a scene that made his heart clench. Catherine was sitting on the bed holding Valerie's hand, who remained lying down with a flushed face and heavy breathing. The girl was clearly running a high fever. "Arthur!" Catherine called him with a frightened voice. "Valerie can't get up, she's very warm." Arthur touched Valerie's forehead and felt the intense heat emanating from her skin. The girl opened her eyes with difficulty, her lips dry and cracked. "Daddy," she whispered in a hoarse voice, "I feel really sick." The word daddy, amidst the fragility of the situation, made Arthur act immediately. He picked Valerie up in his arms, wrapped Catherine in a robe, and rushed to the car, driving straight to the nearest hospital. In the pediatric emergency room, Dr. Robert Samuels examined Valerie while Catherine held tightly to Arthur's hand, her little eyes filled with tears of worry for her twin sister. "She has pneumonia," the doctor diagnosed after examining the tests, "probably caused by previous malnutrition. Her immune system is still recovering from the months on the streets." "Is she going to be okay?" asked Arthur, his voice trembling. "Yes, but she'll need to stay in the hospital for a few days for treatment with intravenous antibiotics." When they took Valerie to the pediatric room, Catherine began to cry desperately. "I don't want to be away. Heard from Valerie. We always sleep together." "Honey, she needs medical treatment," Arthur tried to explain, crouching beside the girl. "Then I'm staying here too. I won't leave her alone." Dr. Samuels observed the interaction and was moved by the bond between the sisters. "We can put an extra mattress in the room if her father doesn't mind spending the nights here." "Of course I don't mind," Arthur replied immediately. It was during the first night at the hospital that everything began to fall apart. Helen Foster arrived the next morning with a grave expression on her face, accompanied by a judicial officer. "Mr. Harrison, I need to speak with you in private." Arthur asked a nurse to stay with the girls and accompanied Helen to a private room. What she told him changed everything. "We've found your father's will. There's a specific clause about Oscar Mason and his family." Helen opened the folder and showed the yellow document. "Your father left clear instructions. Should anything happen to Oscar or his descendants, the Harrison family was to provide adequate care. There is also a sum of money specifically set aside for this." Arthur read the document in shock. His father had really promised to take care of Oscar's family, and even more shocking, he had set aside a considerable amount of money for this purpose, money that was in a bank account Arthur knew nothing about. "That means It means that you have not only a moral right, but also a legal right to care for these girls. Your father officially assumed that responsibility. Arthur felt a mixture of relief and guilt. Relief to know that his connection with the twins was legitimate, guilt to discover that his father had carried this weight alone until he was gone. But there's another problem, Helen continued. This information has reached other people. There is interest from other members of the Mason family in claiming custody of the girls. What other members? A distant aunt, Clara Mason, Oscar's sister. She lives in Chicago and learned of the situation through the same records we found. She's arriving today to meet the girls and assess whether she wants to take over their upbringing. Arthur's world collapsed. He had found a family, had fallen in love with 2 children who filled the void in his life, and now someone could take them away based on blood ties. When does she arrive? She's at the hospital now. She asked to meet the girls immediately. Arthur ran back to the pediatric room, where he found a woman in her 60s talking to Catherine. She had grey hair tied in a simple ponytail and wore modest but clean clothes. Her eyes were kind, but there was a determination in them that made Arthur feel afraid. "So you must be Arthur," the woman said, standing up as he entered the room. "I'm Clara Mason, great-aunt of these precious ones." Valerie was awake, sitting up in the hospital bed, watching the woman with curiosity. Catherine remained close to her sister, clearly uncomfortable with another stranger in their lives. "Girls, this lady says she's your relative," Arthur explained, trying to keep his voice calm. "Not just a relative," Clara said firmly. "I am the sister of your grandfather, Oscar. I have rights over these children." "But we don't know you," Catherine said with her typical frankness, "and we want to stay with Arthur." "Honey, you're too young to understand. Blood family is blood family. I've come to take you to live with me in Chicago." Valerie, still weak from pneumonia, began to cry. "I don't want to go. I want to stay here with Daddy." The scene that followed was devastating. Clara insisted on her legal rights. Helen tried to mediate the situation, and the 2 girls clung to Arthur as if their lives depended on it. "Please," Arthur begged. "They've suffered so much. Here they are happy, safe." "They're being raised by a stranger," Clara retorted. "I am real family." "Real family doesn't abandon children on the streets," Arthur replied, his patience wearing thin. "I didn't know where they were. If I had known, I would have come for them sooner." It was then that Catherine, at 4 years old, said something that silenced everyone in the room. "If you're our real family, why did you never show up before? Why only now that someone is taking good care of us? Do you want us?" The innocent and direct question from a child exposed the raw truth of the situation. Clara had appeared not out of love or genuine concern, but because she discovered the girls were being well cared for by someone with resources. "That's beside the point," Clara said, but her voice had lost some of its conviction. "It is a point," said Valerie, her voice still weak but determined. "Arthur found us when we were alone and hungry. He gave us a home, food, teddy bears. He is our family now." Helen watched everything with a pensive expression. During her years as a social worker, she had seen many cases of distant relatives appearing when orphaned children were adopted by wealthy families, sometimes for genuine love, sometimes for other reasons. "Mrs. Mason," Helen said diplomatically, "I'll need to assess your financial and living situation before any decision is made. The girls need stability." "I can provide stability," Clara insisted, but there was uncertainty in her voice. "Then you won't mind a full assessment. I'll be back tomorrow to talk in more detail." After Clara left, Arthur sat on the hospital bed between the 2 girls. Catherine held one of his hands, Valerie the other. "Daddy," said Valerie, "you won't let her take us, will you?" Arthur looked at those two confident little faces, at the two children who had become his reason for living, and made a promise he intended to keep at any cost. Never. You are my daughters now, and I will fight for you until the end. What he didn't know was that the fight was just beginning, and that in the coming days he would discover truths about his own father that would change everything once more. The next morning, while Valerie was still hospitalized but already showing signs of improvement, Arthur received an unexpected call from Dr. Frank Roberts, his lawyer. "Arthur, I need to see you urgently. There are developments in your case that you need to know about." "What kind of developments?" "I can't talk over the phone. Can you come to my office now?" Arthur asked a nurse to stay with them. Girls, and headed to downtown Westwood. Frank's office was located in a historic building, and the room filled with law books had always conveyed confidence to Arthur. Today, however, the atmosphere seemed charged with tension. "Sit down, Arthur. What I'm about to tell you will be hard to hear." Frank opened a folder on the table and pulled out several documents. "I did a deeper investigation into your father's will and the accident involving Oscar Mason. And your father wasn't just present when Oscar had the accident. He was directly responsible for it." Arthur felt as if the floor had disappeared from under his feet. "What are you saying?" "The records show that Michael had asked Oscar to fix a problem on the bakery ceiling, but the ladder he provided was faulty. One of the steps was loose. Your father knew this, but he was in a hurry to solve the problem before a health inspection the next day." Frank paused, letting the information sink in before continuing. "Oscar fell because the ladder gave way, and Michael never forgave himself for it." "That's why he put that clause in the will," Arthur murmured, the pieces falling into place in his mind. "Exactly. It was guilt, not kindness. He knew he had caused the situation that left Oscar's descendants vulnerable." The revelation hit Arthur like a tsunami of conflicting emotions. Anger at his father for never telling the truth, sadness for the tragedy that had marked two families, and fear of what this meant for his future with the twins. "Frank, does this change anything legally?" "It changes everything. If Clara Mason discovers this information, she can argue that you and your family owe a much greater compensation than just caring for the girls. She could demand significant financial reparations." Arthur returned to the hospital with the weight of that revelation on his shoulders. When he entered the room, he found Clara sitting by Valerie's bed, holding the girl's hand while telling stories about their grandfather, Oscar. "Your grandfather was a very good man," she was saying in a soft voice. "He worked very hard to give the best to his family." Catherine was sitting in the armchair nearby, listening intently. For the first time since Clara had appeared, the girl seemed relaxed in her presence. "Aunt Clara brought pictures of Grandpa," Catherine said when she saw Arthur. "Want to see?" Clara showed some old photographs. One of them showed a young Oscar wearing the bakery uniform, smiling next to a taller man Arthur recognized as his own father. "They were very good friends," Clara explained. "Oscar always spoke of his boss with affection. He said Michael Harrison was like a brother to him." Arthur swallowed hard, feeling the weight of the irony. His father had inadvertently caused the tragedy that destroyed his best friend's family. "Clara," he said, "can we talk in private?" She nodded and the two stepped out into the hallway. Arthur took a deep breath before speaking. "I found out some information about your brother's accident. Information you have the right to know." "What information?" Arthur told her everything, about the faulty ladder, about his father's responsibility, about the guilt Michael carried until he was gone. Clara listened in silence, her expression gradually changing from surprise to deep sadness. "So that's why," she murmured when Arthur finished. "I always wondered why Michael Harrison had created that fund for our family. I thought it was just kindness." It was kindness too, Arthur said. My father was a good man who made a terrible mistake, and he spent the rest of his life trying to fix it. Clara remained silent for a long moment, processing the information. When she finally spoke, her voice was filled with emotion. Arthur, I came here angry, thinking a stranger had taken my girls. But now I see that perhaps fate has placed these children exactly where they needed to be. They returned to the room, where they found a scene that made them both stop at the door. Valerie had dozed off, and Catherine was singing softly to her, the same lullaby Arthur had heard on the first night they slept in his house. They have a very special bond, Clara observed. They suffered a lot together, but it made them even closer. Yes, Arthur agreed. And they're starting to trust adults again. Especially you. That afternoon, Helen Foster returned to the hospital to make her official assessment. She spoke separately with Arthur, with Clara, and finally with the girls themselves. Girls, she said, sitting between the two beds, I need to ask some important questions. Can you answer with honesty? Both nodded solemnly. Where do you feel safest? With Arthur or with Aunt Clara? Catherine and Valerie looked at each other with that silent twin communication. With Arthur, said Catherine, because we've known him longer. But Aunt Clara seems nice too, Valerie added diplomatically. She knows stories about our family. If you could choose, Helen continued, what would you want to happen? This time, Valerie answered first. We wanted to stay with Arthur. He's our daddy now. But, Catherine added thoughtfully, maybe Aunt Clara could visit us sometimes to tell more stories about Grandpa? The girls' answer revealed an impressive maturity for 4-year-olds. They had found a solution that honored both their present and their past. After Helen left, Clara approached Arthur with a determined expression. Arthur, I've made a decision. I'm not going to fight for custody of the girls. Arthur felt such a great relief that his legs almost gave out. Clara, let me finish, she raised her hand, but I have some conditions. What are they? I want to visit them regularly. I want them to know their history, their biological family, and I want to help financially in any way necessary. You don't have to. Yes, I do. I am their only living relative, and even if you are their father now, they deserve to know their roots. Arthur extended his hand to Clara. I accept your conditions. In fact, I think it would be good for them to have a grandmother in their lives. Grandma Clara, she smiled for the first time since she had arrived. I like the sound of that. When they told the twins about the agreement, the reaction was pure joy. Catherine hugged Arthur and then Clara, while Valerie, still weak but radiant, declared that they were now a big family. That night, with Valerie finally sleeping peacefully and Catherine on a makeshift bed next to her sister, Arthur and Clara talked in the hospital corridor about the future. You know, Clara said, when I heard about the girls, I thought I was doing the right thing by coming to get them. But watching the three of you together, they already have a family. Now we have a family, Arthur corrected. You're a part of it too. It was at that moment that Dr. Samuels appeared with the news everyone was waiting for. Valerie was cured and could be discharged the next day. Finally, we can all go home, said Arthur. All of us, repeated Clara, and for the first time in days, Arthur felt that the future was secure. But what none of them knew was that the next day, a discovery at the old bakery would change everything once more, revealing secrets that had remained hidden for decades. A week after Valerie's discharge, Arthur decided to take the twins to see his father's old bakery. The building had been closed for months, awaiting renovations that had been postponed due to financial problems, but he felt it was time for the girls to see the place where their great-grandfather Oscar had worked for so many years. Was this your Grandpa Michael's bakery? Asked Catherine, looking at the exposed brick building with dusty windows. It was, and also where your great-grandpa Oscar worked, Arthur explained, taking the keys out of his pocket. I thought you'd like to see it. Valerie, still a bit fragile after her pneumonia, held tightly to Clara's hand, who had decided to stay a few more days in Westwood to strengthen her bond with the girls. The inside of the bakery smelled of flour and yeast, even after months of being closed. The old ovens dominated one wall, while the empty shelves awaited the return of production. Arthur watched the twins explore the environment with childish curiosity, touching the work surfaces and imagining what the place would be like in operation. "Did Grandpa Oscar make bread here?" asked Valerie, climbing onto a small stool to reach one of the counters. "He made the best bread in town," replied Clara, her eyes shining with memories. "He always arrived at dawn to start work. He said the secret to good bread was to start when the world was still asleep." While Clara told the girls stories about Oscar, Arthur went up to the office on the upper floor to check some documents. The space was dusty and disorganized, with papers scattered on his father's old desk. It was while rummaging through these papers that Arthur found something that made his blood run cold. A sealed envelope with his name written in Michael Harrison's handwriting. The ink was faded, suggesting it had been written years ago. With trembling hands, Arthur opened the envelope and pulled out several handwritten sheets of paper. It was a letter from his father, dated just a few months before he passed away. "My dear son," the letter began, "if you are reading this, it means you finally had the courage to return to the bakery. There are truths I have carried for a long time, truths I should have shared with you while I could." Arthur continued reading, his hands shaking more and more. "Oscar's accident was not a simple oversight on my part. In fact, Oscar had discovered that I was siphoning money from the bakery to cover gambling debts. He didn't report me, but he insisted that I stop this madness. On the day of the accident, we argued fiercely. He threatened to tell you everything if I didn't change my behavior." The revelation hit Arthur like a punch to the gut. His father, the man he had always admired as upright and hard-working, had been a compulsive gambler. Oscar climbed that ladder to fix the ceiling as he always did, but this time he was nervous, shaken by our argument. I should have checked the ladder. I should have asked him to wait. But I was angry, humiliated for being confronted by an employee. When the ladder gave way and he fell, I knew his life was being lost because of my negligence and pride. Arthur had to stop reading for a moment, tears blurring his vision. Downstairs he could hear the twins' laughter as Clara taught them to simulate making imaginary bread. After the accident, I completely stopped gambling. I used all the money I could save to create a fund for Oscar's family. But I never had the courage to approach them directly. How could I look into the eyes of the family of the man who died because of me? The letter continued for 2 more pages, detailing how Michael had tried to find indirect ways to help the Mason family, always frustrated by his own cowardice in not facing the truth directly. "If anything happens to me, promise that you will take care of Oscar's family. It's the only way to give my life meaning after everything I've done wrong." Arthur finished reading the letter in total silence, processing the magnitude of the revelations. His father had not just been negligent, he had been directly responsible for the situation that led to Oscar's life being lost. And worse, he had hidden it for years, letting the guilt corrode his soul. "Daddy, are you okay?" Catherine's voice brought him back to reality. She had come up the stairs and found him sitting in the old chair, holding the letter. "I'm fine, sweetie," he lied, quickly putting the papers away. "I was just remembering Grandpa Michael." Was he nice? Arthur looked at Catherine's innocent face and felt the weight of carrying truths a child should never know. He made mistakes, but he tried to fix them. When they went downstairs, Clara immediately noticed the change in Arthur's demeanor. "Did something happen? We need to talk. Later." The rest of the afternoon passed in a haze for Arthur. He watched the girls play, listened to Clara tell more stories about Oscar, but his mind was consumed by his father's letter and its implications. That night, after the twins had gone to sleep, Arthur told Clara everything. She listened in silence, her expression gradually changing from shock to deep sadness. "So, Oscar died trying to save your father from his own destruction," she murmured when Arthur finished. "Apparently so. And my father spent the rest of his life trying to atone for that guilt." Clara was silent for a long moment, looking out the window at the garden where the twins had played during the day. "Do you know what this means?" she finally said. "What?" "It means that Oscar and Michael were connected by much more than work. They were linked by love, loyalty, forgiveness." She turned to face Arthur. "And it means that you and these girls are destined to be together." "How so?" "Oscar tried to save your father. Now you are saving Oscar's great-granddaughters. It's as if the love my brother felt for the Harrison family is being reciprocated through the generations." Clara's interpretation brought a perspective Arthur hadn't considered. Maybe all that pain and guilt had led to something good. Maybe the suffering of two families was finally being transformed into love and healing. "But what if the girls find out the truth when they're older?" Arthur asked. "Then we will tell them in the only way that matters, as a story of love, forgiveness, and redemption. As the story of two men who loved each other like brothers, even when they made mistakes, and how that love perpetuated through the generations." The next day, Arthur made a decision that would change everything. He called Dr. Frank and asked to officially start the adoption process for the twins. He also decided to reopen the bakery, not just as a business, but as a memorial to Oscar and his father. "We'll call it Two Brothers Bakery," he told the girls during breakfast, "in honor of Grandpa Michael and Great-Grandpa Oscar." "And are we going to help make bread?" asked Valerie, excited. "Of course you will, when you're a little older." Catherine, always thoughtful, asked a question that surprised everyone. "Daddy, do you think Grandpa Michael and Great-Grandpa Oscar are happy in heaven seeing us together?" Arthur looked at the girl's angelic face and felt a peace he hadn't experienced in months. "I think they are, my daughter. I think they are very happy." But what none of them knew was that, at that very moment, Helen Foster was in her office, receiving a call that would bring the last and most devastating twist of all. "Helen, this is the family court. We have an urgent situation involving the twins Catherine and Valerie. A close relative has just filed for custody, and this time she has absolute legal priority." The next morning, Helen Foster arrived at Arthur's mansion with an expression he had learned to fear. Beside her was a young woman, apparently in her mid-30s, with dark brown hair and eyes that held an iron determination. "Mr. Harrison, this is Lucy Mason Smith. She is the daughter of another of Oscar's brothers who lived in Ohio. She has just returned from abroad." Arthur felt the floor disappear from under his feet. Another relative. And from Helen's expression, this one was different from Clara. "Mr. Harrison," Lucy said in a firm voice, "I've come to get my nieces. I am their father's first cousin, and according to the law, I have priority over anyone who is not a blood relative." "But the girls are happy here," Arthur protested, trying to stay calm. "They call me Daddy. That's just the confusion of traumatized children. They need to be with real family." Lucy looked around the mansion with an expression that mixed envy and determination. "Besides, I've discovered information about how my great-uncle Oscar really died. Information that changes everything." Arthur's heart stopped for a moment. Did she know about the letter? "What information?" asked Helen, clearly surprised. that the Harrison family was directly responsible for the precarious situation these children found themselves in, and that there is a moral and financial debt that needs to be settled. At that moment, the twins came down the stairs, still in their pajamas and carrying their teddy bears. They stopped when they saw the adults gathered in the room, their survival instincts immediately on alert. "Daddy, who are these people?" asked Catherine, running to hide behind Arthur's legs. "This is your Aunt Lucy," Helen explained in a soft voice. "She is your daddy's sister." Valerie approached hesitantly, studying the woman's face. "Did you know our parents?" "I did, dear, and I've come to take you home with me." The terror that instantly took over the girls' faces was unmistakable. Catherine started to cry, clinging tighter to Arthur. "We don't want to leave. This is our home now." "Girls," Lucy said, trying to sound gentle but failing to hide her impatience, "you are too young to understand. Blood family is what matters." "Arthur is our family now," Valerie declared with a courage that impressed everyone present. "He took care of us when no one else wanted to." "Because he was obligated to," Lucy retorted. "His family caused our tragedy." Lucy's words fell upon the room like a bomb. The twins looked confusedly at Arthur, not fully understanding, but realizing that something very serious was happening. "Lucy," Helen intervened, "perhaps it's better if we discuss this in private." "There's nothing to discuss. I have legal rights over these children, and I intend to exercise them." It was then that Clara appeared at the door of the room. She had spent the night at Arthur's house, sleeping in the guest room, and the sound of voices had woken her. "Lucy, is that you?" The young woman turned and her face contorted into an expression of disgust. "Aunt Clara, I should have known you'd be here. I thought you were still living in France. I came back when I heard that Cousin Charles's daughters were being raised by strangers." Lucy looked coldly at Clara. "And that you had simply allowed it." "Allowed it? I encouraged it," Clara said firmly, "because I saw that they are being loved and well cared for. Out of guilt, pure guilt from the Harrison family." The tension in the air was almost palpable. The twins watched the confrontation between the adults, their small worlds once again threatened by forces they couldn't fully comprehend. "Perhaps," Helen suggested, "we should allow Lucy to spend some time with the girls before we make any final decisions." "There's no need," Lucy replied dryly. "I've already prepared everything. I have an apartment in Chicago, a stable job, and I can offer the girls a proper education and a dignified life." "And love?" asked Arthur, his voice laden with pain. "Can you offer love?" "Of course I can. They're my nieces." Catherine let go of Arthur's legs and walked up to Lucy, her little eyes red from crying, but with a determination that surprised everyone. "Do you love us?" "Of course I love you, dear." "Then why did you never come to visit us? Why did you never send a letter? Why? Did you only show up now?" The innocent question from a 4-year-old exposed the raw truth of the situation. Lucy hesitated, clearly not expecting to be confronted so directly. "I was living far away. I didn't know you needed help. But Aunt Clara also lived far away, and she still came when she found out," Valerie observed, with relentless logic. "That's different. It's different because Aunt Clara came for love, and you came for anger," Catherine concluded, demonstrating an impressive emotional perception for her age. The silence that followed was awkward. Lucy clearly hadn't expected resistance from the very children. She had come to rescue. "Girls, you are too young to understand legal matters," she said, changing her strategy. "But I am a lawyer, and I know your rights. Arthur Harrison has no rights over you." "He has the right that we gave him," declared Valerie. "We chose him as our daddy." It was at that moment that Dr. Frank Roberts arrived, accompanied by another younger man who introduced himself as Dr. Rafael Santos. a specialist in child law. "Mr. Harrison," Frank said, "we received your call. We came as soon as we could." Lucy straightened up, assuming a professional posture. "I imagine you are the lawyers hired by the Harrison family to try to circumvent the law." "Actually," Dr. Raphael said calmly, "we came to inform you of some important legal issues that may affect this case." "What issues?" "First, the fact that there is an adoption process already underway, initiated based on Michael Harrison's will, which created specific legal obligations for this family. That has no legal value superior to the rights of blood relatives," Lucy retorted. "Second," Raphael continued as if she hadn't spoken, "the fact that the minors themselves have expressed a clear and consistent preference for their current situation. They are too young to decide. And third," said Frank, taking a document from his folder, "the fact that you, Lucy Mason Smith, have a judicial history that could complicate your ability to obtain custody." Lucy's face paled. "What are you talking about?" "A case for abandonment of a minor in 2019, involving a child who was under your temporary care in Paris, physical assault against a former partner in 2020, documented alcohol problems in medical reports. That was in the past. I'm recovered." "You may be," Raphael agreed, "but this is information that the judge will take into consideration." Helen observed everything with a thoughtful expression. During her years of experience, she had developed an intuition for when someone was genuinely seeking the well-being of the children versus when there were other motivations at play. "Miss Smith," she said diplomatically, "how about we allow the girls to spend the day with you, to get to know each other better before we make any decisions?" "We don't want to," Catherine said immediately. "Me neither," agreed Valerie. "We want to stay with Daddy Arthur and Grandma Clara." The clear and unanimous rejection from the girls was the final blow to Lucy's strategy. She looked around the room at the determined faces of the adults who truly cared about the children, at the girls themselves who saw her as a threat instead of a savior, and her facade finally began to crumble. "You don't understand," she said, her voice starting to break. "I need them. I need someone in the family to trust me again." The involuntary confession revealed her true motivations. She wasn't seeking the twins' well-being, but trying to rebuild her own life through them. "Lucy," Clara said gently, "you will always be welcome in our lives, but the girls have already found their family." That afternoon, after Lucy left with vague promises to continue the legal fight, Arthur sat in the garden watching the twins play. The setting sun painted everything in golden hues, and for the first time in weeks, he felt a genuine peace, but he knew the fight wasn't completely over yet. 2 weeks had passed since Lucy's visit, and a false sense of tranquility had settled over the mansion. The twins returned to their normal routine, playing in the garden, basic literacy lessons Arthur had started teaching, and regular visits from Clara, who had become a constant and welcome presence in their lives. It was during a particularly peaceful morning, while Arthur was preparing breakfast and the girls were watching cartoons, that the doorbell rang insistently. Through the window, he saw an official car parked in front of the gate, and his heart immediately raced. Helen Foster was at the door, but this time accompanied by a court officer and a woman he didn't know. An elegant lady of about 60, wearing a navy blue suit and carrying a leather briefcase. "Mr. Harrison," Helen said with a grave expression, "this is Dr. Beatrice Fonseca from the district attorney's office. We need to talk urgently." "Did something happen?" Lucy Mason Smith filed a lawsuit challenging the adoption process, and she got a temporary injunction. Helen's words echoed in Arthur's mind like a nightmare. "What does that mean?" Dr. Fonseca stepped forward, her voice professional but not devoid of compassion. "It means that until the case is definitively resolved by the judge, the girls need to stay in a neutral environment, a temporary shelter." "No," Arthur said, his voice failing. "Please, no. It's only temporary, Helen insisted, until we can prove that the current situation is the best for them. At that moment, Catherine and Valerie appeared in the room, alerted by the serious tone of the voices. They looked at the unknown adults and immediately positioned themselves beside Arthur, their survival instincts activated again. "Daddy, what's happening?" asked Valerie, her little voice trembling. Arthur crouched down to their level, struggling to control his own emotions. "Girls, these people, they think you need to stay somewhere else for a little while." "What other place?" Catherine asked, already starting to cry. "A safe place," Dr. Fonseca said gently, "where other children stay while the adults resolve important issues." "A shelter," Valerie translated with a painful maturity for a 4-year-old. "They want to put us in a shelter." "It's temporary," Helen repeated, but her own voice sounded uncertain. "That's what they always said before taking us away from everyone who liked us," Catherine said, her voice laden with trauma and disillusionment. The tears Arthur had been holding back finally began to stream down his face. He hugged the two girls, feeling their small bodies tremble against his. "How long?" he asked Dr. Fonseca. "It could be a few weeks. It could be a few months. It depends on how the legal process develops." It was then that Clara arrived for her daily visit, finding the devastating scene in the room. When the situation was explained to her, her reaction was immediate and fierce. "This is absurd! These children just found stability." "Mrs. Mason," Dr. Fonseca said patiently, "I understand your concern, but the law is clear about the rights of blood relatives. The law should protect the best interests of the children, not satisfy the whims of relatives who appeared out of nowhere." While the adults argued, the twins whispered to each other in that secret language only twins possess. Suddenly, Catherine stood up and walked to the stairs. "Where are you going, dear?" Helen asked. "To get our teddy bears and some clothes," Catherine replied with a resignation that broke everyone's heart. "If we have to go, we'd better take our things." "No," Valerie said firmly, taking her sister's hand. "We're not going." "But they'll make us. Then we'll run away, like we did before." The conversation between the girls was heard by everyone, and the silence that followed was charged with tension and sadness. Arthur stood up and walked over to them. "Girls, don't run away. I promise I will fight for you every day until I can bring you back home." "But what if you can't?" asked Catherine. "What if they never let us come back?" The question was fair and painful. Arthur couldn't promise something that was out of his control. "Then I'll keep trying. Forever, if necessary." Dr. Fonseca observed the interaction with growing discomfort. In her 20 years of working on family cases, she had rarely seen such a genuine bond between an adult and children who were not biologically his. "Mr. Harrison," she said, "may I ask the girls a few questions in private?" Arthur nodded reluctantly and left the room with the other adults. Dr. Fonseca sat on the sofa and gestured for the twins to approach. "Girls, I'm going to ask some very important questions, and I need you to answer with complete honesty, okay?" Both nodded solemnly. "Do you feel safe here?" "Yes," they answered in unison. "Has Arthur ever hurt you in any way?" "Never," Catherine said emphatically. "He only gives us affection and yummy food." "And do you want to keep living here?" "Yes," said Valerie. "It's our home. Arthur is our daddy." "And what if I said that maybe you could be happier with your Aunt Lucy?" "She doesn't want us because she likes us," Catherine said with impressive perception. "She wants us for another reason." "What reason?" Valerie thought for a moment before answering. She seemed mad at Arthur, like he did something bad. But Arthur never did anything bad to anyone. Dr. Fonseca finished the interview more conflicted than when she started. The girls were clearly well-adjusted, happy, and had a genuine bond with Arthur. But the law was complicated when it came to the rights of biological relatives. When the adults returned to the room, she announced her decision. I'm going to grant a 48-hour extension for the situation to be re-evaluated, but after that, the girls will need to go to the temporary shelter. 48 hours, Arthur repeated, feeling the weight of the impossible deadline. That night, after Helen and Dr. Fonseca left, Arthur sat with the twins on his bed. Clara was beside them, all trying to process the desperate situation. "Daddy," said Catherine, "if we have to go to the shelter, will you visit us?" "Every day they allow me to," Arthur promised. "And will you still be our daddy? Forever, no matter what happens." Valerie snuggled closer to him. "Arthur, why do adults make everything so complicated? Why can't they just let people who love each other stay together?" The question from a 4-year-old exposed the absurd cruelty of a system that prioritized bureaucracy over love, laws over emotional bonds, papers over real relationships. "I don't know, my daughter," Arthur admitted. "Sometimes adults forget what really matters." That dawn, while the twins finally fell asleep in his bed, Arthur stayed awake, making one call after another. To Dr. Frank, to other lawyers, to anyone who might have an idea to reverse the situation. It was at 3 a.m. that he received an unexpected call that would change everything. On the other end of the line, a female voice he didn't immediately recognize. "Mr. Harrison, this is Anna Page Scott, an investigative journalist. I received information about your case from an anonymous source, and I believe I can help you." "How?" "I discovered some very interesting information about Lucy Mason Smith, information that could completely change this process. Can I meet you tomorrow?" For the first time in days, Arthur felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe there was still a chance to keep his family together. Anna Page Scott arrived at the mansion the next morning, carrying a folder full of documents and photos. She was a woman of about 40, with red hair tied in a messy bun and green eyes that conveyed the determination of someone used to uncovering hidden truths. "Mr. Harrison, what I'm about to show you may be shocking," she said, sitting in the room where Arthur, Clara, and Dr. Frank were waiting anxiously. "But it's information that could save the girl's situation." "Show us everything," Arthur said, holding Clara's hand tightly. Anna Page opened the folder and pulled out several photographs and documents. "Lucy Mason Smith is not who she says she is, or rather, she omitted crucial information about her life in France." "What kind of information?" asked Dr. Frank, adjusting his glasses. "She didn't return to the United States by choice. She was deported." Anna Page placed an official document on the table. "Involvement in schemes to forge documents for illegal immigrants. Irregular work as a nanny without proper licenses." Arthur felt a mixture of relief and horror. Do the French authorities know about this? Not only do they know, but they have an extensive file on her, and there's something more serious. Anna Page took a deep breath. The child she was accused of abandoning in 2019, it was a 5-year-old French girl, the daughter of a family she was working for illegally. She left the child alone for 3 days while she fled to avoid deportation. The silence in the room was deafening. Clara covered her face with her hands, clearly shaken. "How did you get this information?" asked Dr. Frank. "I have contacts in the American community in Paris. When I heard about the case from a source who prefers to remain anonymous, I started investigating." Anna Page turned to Arthur. "Someone who knows the twin situation contacted me, saying an injustice was being committed." Arthur suspected who the anonymous source might be, but didn't want to speculate. The important thing was that they now had ammunition to fight Lucy's lawsuit. "There's more," Anna Page continued. "I found out that Lucy has considerable debts in France. She is being sued by 3 different families for negligence in childcare. She came back to the US not out of family love, but because she was fleeing from French justice. Dr. Frank took the documents and examined them carefully. This completely changes the case. With this evidence, I can file a motion to cancel the injunction. How much time do we have? Asked Arthur, looking at the clock. There were only 12 hours left before the 48-hour deadline expired. I can file the motion today, but we need to act quickly. While Dr. Frank rushed off to the courthouse with the documents, Arthur went upstairs to talk to the twins. He found them in their room, sitting on the bed, drawing with crayons. The drawing showed a house with 3 figures, a tall man and 2 small girls, under a radiant sun. "Daddy," Catherine said without looking up from the paper, "we drew our family to take to the shelter, so we don't forget you." Arthur's heart both broke and filled with hope at the same time. "Maybe you won't have to go to the shelter." "What do you mean?" Valerie raised her head, her eyes shining with cautious hope. "We found out things about Aunt Lucy that might change everything." "Bad things?" Arthur hesitated, trying to find a way to explain the situation without scaring the girls. "Things that show she might not be the right person to take care of you." "We already knew that," Catherine said with her typical frankness. "She didn't really like us." That afternoon, Dr. Frank called with news that made Arthur's heart leap with joy. "I did it. The injunction has been suspended. The judge wants a full hearing next week to evaluate all the evidence. And until then, the girls can stay with you, officially." Arthur ran to the room to tell the twins, who received the news with shouts of joy and tight hugs. Clara cried with relief, and for the first time in weeks, the house once again had an atmosphere of genuine happiness, but the victory was temporary. The next morning, Helen Foster appeared again, this time with an even graver expression than before. "Arthur, I'm afraid we have a new problem." "What now?" "Lucy didn't accept the judge's decision. She kidnapped the girls." Helen's words echoed in Arthur's mind like gunshots. "What are you saying?" "She broke into the school where you had enrolled Catherine and Valerie yesterday. She said she was their aunt and had authorization to pick them up. The school, confused by the whole legal situation, let her take them." Arthur felt his legs give out. He sat down heavily on the sofa, trying to process the information. "Where are they?" "We don't know. Lucy disappeared with them. We've already alerted all the competent authorities." "My God," whispered Clara, who had arrived for her daily visit. "That woman is crazy." It was then that Arthur's phone rang. An unknown number appeared on the screen. "Hello? Arthur Harrison?" Lucy's voice sounded tense and desperate. "It's me. I have the girls. Lucy, for God's sake, where are they? Are they okay?" "They're with me, and they're staying. We're already leaving. Westwood, please don't do this to them. They've suffered so much. They'll get used to it. I'm their blood family." Arthur could hear voices in the background. It was Catherine and Valerie crying, calling for him. The sound broke his heart. "Let me talk to them." "No. Lucy, you don't understand. These girls have abandonment trauma. What you're doing will destroy them emotionally. I'll take good care of them, better than you. Where are you?" "In a safe place, and we're staying here until this whole legal mess is resolved in my favor." The call ended, leaving Arthur holding a dead phone and feeling completely powerless. Helen immediately alerted the competent authorities, initiating an official search for the missing girls. "She can't go far," Helen said, trying to reassure Arthur. "We have roadblocks on all the main highways." But Arthur knew the region better than the authorities. There were many remote places where someone could hide for days, especially if they had planned ahead. As the hours passed with no news, Arthur tortured himself imagining what the twins were feeling. They had just found stability, security, love. And now they were again in the hands of someone who saw them as property, instead of human beings with feelings and needs. "We have to do something," he said to Clara, who remained by his side. "I can't just sit here waiting." "What do you suggest?" "I'm going to look for them. I know places where she could be hiding." It was then that Anna Page Scott called with information that would change the course of the search. "Arthur, I found something important. Lucy has an ex-boyfriend in Westwood, a man named Charles Figueroa, who lives in an isolated country house on the outskirts of town. Do you have the address?" "I do, but Arthur, don't go alone. This woman is clearly desperate and unpredictable." Arthur wrote down the address and hung up the phone. He looked at Clara and saw in her eyes the same determination he felt. "Let's go get our girls," she said simply. As they headed to the car, Arthur prayed silently that it wasn't too late, that the additional trauma wouldn't definitively break the fragile bonds of trust the twins had managed to build again. The country house was a 40-minute drive from the center of Westwood, hidden at the end of a dusty dirt road surrounded by sugarcane fields. Arthur drove in silence, his hands tight on the steering wheel, while Clara tried to call Helen to inform her of the location. "No signal," she said, looking at her cell phone. "We're too isolated." When they finally spotted the property, Arthur stopped the car at a safe distance. The house was simple, a small exposed brick house with a wooden porch, surrounded by a dirt yard where a few chickens pecked freely. A red car was parked in the shade of a mango tree. "It's her car," whispered Clara, recognizing the vehicle Lucy had used to get to the mansion. Arthur studied the house, trying to detect signs of movement. Closed windows, drawn curtains, absolute silence. If the twins were there, they weren't making any noise. "I'm going to get closer," he said. "You stay here and try to get a signal to call for help." "Arthur, it could be dangerous." "It's more dangerous to leave my daughters in that woman's hands for any longer." Arthur got out of the car and walked carefully towards the house, using trees and bushes as cover. When he got close to the porch, he could hear voices coming from inside, one female and angry, two childish and crying. "Stop crying." Lucy's voice sounded exhausted and irritated. "You'll get used to all this. We want Daddy Arthur." Catherine's voice was clear even through her tears. "You have no right to take us." "I have every right. I'm your family." "Family doesn't hurt people," shouted Valerie. "Family doesn't make us afraid." Arthur felt a fury growing in his chest. He approached the side window and managed to peek through a gap in the curtain. The twins were sitting on the living room floor, hugging each other, their faces red from crying. Lucy was pacing back and forth, clearly desperate and without a clear plan. A dark-haired man of about 35 was sitting in an old armchair, smoking a cigarette and watching the scene with a bored expression. Presumably, Charles Figueroa. "Lucy, this is turning into a huge mess," he said in a drawling voice. "The authorities must be looking for you." "Shut up, Charles. I know what I'm doing." "Do you really? Because kidnapping children doesn't seem like a very smart strategy to me." "It's not kidnapping. They're my nieces." Arthur decided he had heard enough. He went around the house looking for another entrance and found a back door that led to the kitchen. He turned the handle slowly. It was unlocked. He entered silently, his footsteps muffled by the worn kitchen rug. He could hear the argument continuing in the living room. "Aunt Lucy." Valerie's voice sounded calmer. "If you really love us, why don't you let us go back home? We promise you can visit us." "You're too young to understand. Arthur Harrison has no right over you." "He has the right we gave him," Catherine said with that premature wisdom that always surprised adults. Arthur approached the entrance to the living room, assessing the situation. Lucy was with her back to him. Charles was still in the armchair, and the girls were on the floor near the opposite wall. If he could get to them quickly. It was at that moment that Catherine looked towards the kitchen and saw him. Her eyes widened, but she had enough presence of mind not to scream or draw attention. Instead, she discreetly nudged Valerie, who also saw him. The two girls looked at each other with that silent twin communication and almost simultaneously began to move slowly towards the wall closest to Arthur. "Where are you going?" Lucy asked, turning slightly. "We just want to be near the wall," Valerie said innocently. "The floor is cold." It was the distraction Arthur needed. He entered the room quickly, passing behind Lucy before she could fully react. "Arthur!" the twins shouted simultaneously, running towards him. "What the hell?" Charles stood up from the armchair, dropping his cigarette on the floor. Lucy turned, her face a mask of shock and anger. "How did you find us?" "That doesn't matter now," Arthur said, hugging the two girls who clung to him as if their lives depended on it. "Are you okay?" he asked them. "We are now," whispered Catherine against his chest. "Daddy, she said we would never see you again," said Valerie, her voice choked with emotion. "That will never happen," Arthur promised, kissing the top of their two little heads. "Never." "You have no right to be here," Lucy shouted. "These children are mine." "We are not yours," Catherine protested, turning to face the woman. "We will never be yours." Charles watched the scene with growing discomfort. "Lucy, this has gone too far. Let the man take the children." "Shut up, Charles." "I won't shut up. You kidnapped two. And children. That's a serious crime." It was at that moment that sirens could be heard in the distance, gradually getting louder. Clara had managed to call for help. "Damn it," Charles muttered, putting out his cigarette in the ashtray. "The authorities are coming. I'm not going to be arrested because of your madness." He headed for the front door, clearly intending to flee before the police arrived. Lucy looked around desperately, like a cornered animal. "You don't understand," she shouted, tears starting to stream down her face. "I have no one left. I lost everything in France. These girls are all I have left of my family." "Lucy," Arthur said in a gentler voice, "I understand your pain, but you can't build your happiness on their suffering. They will learn to love me." "You can't force love," Valerie said with a wisdom impressive for her 4 years. "Love happens when people are good to each other." The sirens were very close now. Through the window, Arthur could see police cars coming up the dusty road, followed by the social services van. Lucy collapsed on the sofa, covering her face with her hands. "I just wanted a family," she sobbed. "I just wanted to belong somewhere." "You can have a family," Catherine said, letting go of Arthur's hug to cautiously approach the woman. "But not like this. Not by scaring people." The girl, with her natural compassion, even after all she had been through, gently touched Lucy's arm. "If you were nice to us, we could be friends. But you have to stop trying to take us away." Lucy looked at the angelic face of the child she had just kidnapped, and something inside her finally broke. The tears flowed more intensely. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry." When Helen and the police officers entered the house, they found a surreal scene. Arthur hugging Valerie, Catherine consoling a weeping Lucy, and an atmosphere of strange but genuine resolution. "Is everything okay here?" Helen asked, quickly assessing the situation. "It is now," Arthur replied. "My daughters are safe." As Lucy was led out of the house by the police officers, she stopped at the door and looked one last time at the twins. "Catherine, Valerie, I hope one day you can forgive me." "We already forgive you," Valerie said simply, "but we don't want to be scared anymore." During the trip back to town, with the girls finally asleep in the back seat after the day's trauma, Arthur reflected on everything that had happened. In a few months, his life had changed completely. From a lonely, bitter man to the father of 2 extraordinary girls who had taught him more about love than he had learned in 52 years of life. "Arthur," Clara said softly. You know this isn't over yet, right? There's still the hearing, still legal bureaucracy. I know, he replied, looking in the rearview mirror at the two small sleeping figures. But now I know we'll make it, the three of us together. What he didn't know was that the hearing the following week would bring the final and most surprising revelation of all. The Westwood courthouse was quiet on Monday morning when Arthur arrived accompanied by the twins and Clara. It was the day of the final hearing, the one that would definitively decide the girl's future. During the week that had passed since the rescue at the country house, Arthur had done everything to maintain normality in the two's lives, but he knew they noticed his anxiety. "Daddy, are you nervous?" asked Catherine, noticing how he adjusted his tie for the 10th time. "A little," he admitted, "but don't worry, everything will be fine." Dr. Frank met them at the courthouse entrance, carrying an even thicker folder than usual. Beside him, Anna Page Scott offered an encouraging smile. "We're ready," Frank said. "We have all the necessary evidence." Inside the hearing room, Judge Maurice Andrews, a 60-year-old man known for his seriousness and fairness, presided over an imposing bench. Helen was present, as was Dr. Beatrice Fonseca and, to everyone's surprise, Lucy Mason-Smith, accompanied by a public defender. The twins sat between Arthur and Clara, their small hands intertwined, as they observed the formal environment with a mixture of curiosity and nervousness. "Mr. Harrison," the judge began, "before we start the hearing, there is an important matter that needs to be clarified." Arthur felt his stomach contract. "Yes, Your Honor. We have received new information about this case, information that could completely change our perspective." The judge opened a folder on his bench. An additional document was discovered in Michael Harrison's will, a document that had been filed separately and was only found during a more detailed search of the clerk's offices. Dr. Frank stood up, clearly surprised. "What kind of document, Your Honor?" "A formal acknowledgement of moral and legal responsibility for the descendants of Oscar Mason, including a specific clause about formal adoption in case of need." The silence in the room was absolute. Arthur felt his heart beating so loudly he was sure everyone could hear it. "More specifically," the judge continued, "Michael Harrison left clear instructions that, should the direct descendants of Oscar Mason be orphaned or in a vulnerable situation, his son Arthur Harrison should assume their official legal guardianship, with all family resources available for that purpose." Catherine whispered to Valerie, "What does that mean?" "It means Daddy can keep us forever," replied Valerie, who even at 4 had understood the essence of the revelation. The judge addressed the twins directly. "Girls, can you approach?" Catherine and Valerie walked to the judge's bench, hand in hand, their identical blue dresses making their special bond even more evident. "Catherine and Valerie," the judge said in a gentle voice, "I'm going to ask a very important question. Who do you want to live with?" "With Daddy Arthur," they replied in unison, without hesitation. "And why?" Catherine thought for a moment before answering, "Because he really loves us, and because when we're scared he makes us feel safe, and because he makes yummy sandwiches," added Valerie, drawing smiles from everyone in the room, "and because he never yells at us. And what if I told you that you might have the right to a significant financial inheritance through the Harrison family?" The girls looked at each other, confused. "We don't understand," said Catherine. "It means you might have money, a lot of money." "Does the money come with Daddy Arthur?" asked Valerie. "It can." "Then that's okay," Catherine said pragmatically. "But what we really want is to stay with him." The judge smiled, a genuine smile that completely transformed his serious expression. "I understand." He then addressed Lucy. "Mrs. Mason-Smith, In light of this new information, and considering the events of last week, do you still maintain your claim to the girl's custody? Lucy stood up slowly. There was a noticeable change in her appearance. Her hair was simpler, her clothes more modest, and her posture conveyed a humility that was not present before. "Your Honor," she said in a choked voice, "during these days in jail, I've had time to reflect on my actions, and I realized I was trying to force something that wasn't genuine." She turned to look directly at the twins. "Catherine, Valerie, you taught me that family isn't about legal rights or blood ties. It's about love, care, protection. And you already have all of that with Arthur." The girls watched her with that intense seriousness only children possess. "So you're not going to try to take us away anymore?" asked Catherine. "Never again, I promise." "And can you be our friend?" asked Valerie, always willing to offer forgiveness. Lucy began to cry. "If you'll let me, I'd love to be the distant aunt who visits sometimes and brings gifts." "Maybe," Catherine agreed generously, "but only if you promise to never scare us again." "I promise." The judge observed the entire interaction with growing attention. "Mr. Harrison, please approach." Arthur stood up and walked to the bench, the twins immediately positioning themselves at his side. "Mr. Harrison, considering all the evidence presented, your father's will, the evident well-being of the girls, and especially their clear expression of will, this court grants your petition for the full adoption of Catherine and Valerie Mason." The words echoed in the room like celestial music. Arthur felt his legs give out and had to lean on the bench. "Does this mean they are officially my daughters?" "It means you are officially a family, with all the rights and responsibilities that implies." Catherine and Valerie shouted with joy and jumped into Arthur's arms, who lifted them off the ground in a hug that seemed to last an eternity. Clara cried with happiness. Dr. Frank smiled with professional satisfaction, and even Helen discreetly wiped away a tear. "There is one more thing," said the judge, "the fund left by Michael Harrison for the Mason. Family will be transferred to an account in the girls' names to be used for their education and well-being. The amount is considerable." Dr. Frank whispered the amount in Arthur's ear, who widened his eyes in surprise. "Daddy, why are you making that strange face?" asked Valerie. "Because you two just became very rich little girls," he replied, still in shock. "We're rich?" asked Catherine. "Does that mean we can buy all the teddy bears in the store?" "It means you can have an excellent education and a secure future," Arthur corrected. "But will we still live in the same house?" asked Valerie, worried. "Of course we will. And will you still be our daddy? Forever." "Then it's okay," concluded Catherine. "The rest doesn't matter." 6 months later, the Two Brothers Bakery reopened with a party that brought the whole town together. The twins, now officially Catherine Harrison and Valerie Harrison, ran through the renovated establishment, helping Arthur serve customers and telling anyone who would listen that they had the best daddy in the world. Clara had moved to Westwood and worked at the bakery, teaching the girls old recipes from the Mason family. Lucy kept her promise, visiting once a month, always bringing simple gifts and stories about the family the girls had never known. On one wall of the bakery, a bronze plaque honored the memory of Michael Harrison and Oscar Mason. In memory of two men who, though separated by circumstances, remained united by love and family. One morning, as Arthur was preparing the day's bread, Catherine appeared in the kitchen, still in her pajamas. "Daddy, I dreamed about our mum last night." "You did? What did she say?" "That she was happy because we found you, and that Grandpa Oscar and Grandpa Michael are taking care of us from heaven." Arthur stopped working and hugged his daughter, feeling a deep peace fill his heart. "I think she's right." "Daddy?" "Yes? Thank you for not giving up on us. Thank you for choosing me as your father." Outside, Valerie was playing in the bakery's garden, singing the song her biological mother had taught her years ago. But now the melody sounded different, no longer sad and melancholic, but joyful and full of hope. Because sometimes, when all seems lost, love finds a way to bring the right people together at the right time, creating families that are not defined by blood, but by choice, dedication, and the daily miracle of caring for one another. And so, a story that began with two hungry girls trying to steal coins to buy bread ended with a complete family, a thriving bakery, and the certainty that true love always finds a way home.